The wind outside the stone walls of the Mbali estate howled like it carried the secrets of the dead. But inside the house, the voice that spoke was colder than the night. "Make sure she never returns," said Zalika, her words like a knife cutting. Through quiet. On the other end of the line, a rough male voice chuckled. "Should I make it messy or clean?" Zalika didn't flinch. "I don't care how you do it. Just bury her, deep, where not even the gods will find her." She ended the call and stood still, breathing slowly. Tonight, the girl's fate was sealed, but to understand how it came to this wicked whisper between a stepmother and death itself, you must know the storm that had been building for years inside the house of Chief Makemba. His name carried weight across the great city of Zuberi. From judges to smugglers, from government men to cattle herders, all knew Chief Makemba. People bent low when he entered a room. His decisions could open doors or lock someone in a grave. A man of strategy, a man of strength, a man no one dared to cross. But behind the polished wooden gates of his hilltop mansion, another kind of war raged, quieter, deadlier, and one he never saw coming. Makemba's first wife, Nyarai, had passed 5 years ago. And yet her presence never left the home. Her laughter still echoed down the marble hallways, her wisdom quoted at family dinners, her painted portrait guarded the staircase like a queen watching her court. Her memory was alive because of one reason: her daughter, Nyasha. Nyasha was 20 and already walked with the composure of a ruler. She had Nyarai's calm eyes, her eloquence, her grace. But she had her father's clever tongue and fearless logic. She was the storm and the shelter, all at once. And the city adored her. She wasn't just Chief Makemba's daughter, she was his future. Zalika, his second wife, hated that truth with every beat of her heart. "She is gone," Zalika often muttered to herself, standing before Nyarai's old things. But still she rules this house, and it was true. Even in death, Nyarai's light cast shadows over Zalika's life. The housemaids spoke in whispers. The uncles nodded when Nyasha entered. Even Makemba's business partners turned, their ears toward Nyasha when she gave her thoughts during meetings. Zalika had done everything to rise from her humble beginnings. She had married Makemba, bore him a son, dressed in silk, poured wine at ceremonies, and smiled through every insult that came with being the second wife. She hosted banquets, walked in jeweled shoes, and pretended not to hear the gossip. But the truth rang louder than a village drum. Nyasha was the one they admired. Nyasha, who laughed like her mother. Nyasha, who corrected elders without disrespect. Nyasha, who understood profits and politics before she turned 18. Zalika had tried to brush off the jealousy, to remind herself that she too held a title. But jealousy has a way of growing roots in silence, and Zalika's roots ran deep. Each compliment Nyasha received felt like a thorn in her flesh. Each look of admiration someone gave her stepdaughter turned into another match tossed into her chest. Still, she wore her mask, elegant, obedient, and sweet. But behind that soft smile was a heart wrapped in poison. The day everything shifted came during the grand harvest ball. The sky that evening was a painting of gold and purple. The courtyard of the estate shimmered with lanterns. Drummers beat soft rhythms while elite guests sipped palm wine under carved wooden arches. The who's who of Zuberi society had gathered under one roof. Zalika stood beside her husband, a vision of grace in her turquoise wrapper and coral beads, greeting guests with carefully curated warmth. Then Chief Makemba raised his glass. "Tonight," he said, his voice firm and proud, "I want to honor my daughter, Nyasha, my heir." The room froze for a breath. Then came the roar of applause. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled wildly. Nyasha stepped forward, her smile glowing in the soft light. Her poise was unshakable. Zalika stood frozen, the noise around her muffled. The joy in the room swirled around Nyasha like a crown of stars, and for the first time, Zalika realized something. She was invisible. The whispers returned that night, louder, sharper. Nyasha will inherit everything. Zalika's son, he'll be lucky to run a farm. As the celebration wore on, Zalika slipped away into the shadows of the hallway, her chest tight, her thoughts racing. She had married into power, but power had never belonged to her. She had given Makemba her loyalty, her body, her silence. But all his love, all his legacy, belonged to another woman's child. And Zalika knew what happened to women who stayed silent in households like this. She had seen them. Soft-hearted second wives who were pushed aside when their husbands died. Their children cast out while the first wife's children inherited everything. No, Zalika would not be one of them. That night, as fireworks crackled above the estate and guests toasted Nyasha's future, Zalika stood at her bedroom window and made a decision that would burn through blood and bone. Nyasha must disappear, but not through chaos. Not through screams. This had to be careful, slow, surgical. A woman who moves with rage is dismissed, but a woman who plants doubt like seeds can destroy mountains. So Zalika began her work. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She whispered. "She's growing too bold," she murmured to one of the advisors at dinner. "A child must learn to listen." "She speaks over her father now," she said lightly to an auntie at a wedding. "So much freedom. I wonder if it will teach her humility. She's changing," she sighed to a maid. "The money, the attention, it makes the young forget themselves." The words floated from ear to ear, house to house, gathering steam like morning fog. Before long, the very people who once adored Nyasha started squinting, wondering, whispering, was she becoming arrogant? Had power gone to her head? Even Chief Makemba began to pause. Zalika knew that poison, if poured too quickly, would draw attention, so she poured it in drops, slow, steady, almost gentle. She didn't confront Makemba. No, that would be reckless. Instead, she waited until he was relaxed, flipping through his phone under the warm yellow light of their private lounge, a fire crackling low in the hearth. "She walks into meetings like she built this empire," Zalika said softly, her voice full of concern, not anger. Makemba barely looked up. "She's young," he replied, swiping his thumb across the screen. Zalika hesitated just long enough to seem reluctant. "Young? Yes," she murmured, eyes low. "But sometimes, I wonder if she's learning humility. A girl given too much too soon can forget where she came from." Now he looked at her, really looked, his brow furrowed just slightly. Zalika lowered her gaze, as though she regretted speaking. "I shouldn't say more," she added, biting her lip. "But I overheard something." Makemba's voice dropped. "From who?" "Some of your associates," she said slowly, as if recalling every word carefully. "They say she behaves entitled, that she doesn't listen, that she's already acting like she owns everything." The phone in his hand stilled. "She loves you," Zalika added quickly, her tone softening. "I know she does, but love doesn't always mean loyalty, Makemba. You know that." He said nothing, but his silence told her everything. The seed had been planted, and soon Zalika would water it with fire. That night she sat alone in her dressing room, eyes fixed on her own reflection. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfectly braided, but beneath it all her expression was hard as bone. Whispers wouldn't be enough, not for someone like Nyasha. She needed something stronger, evidence, something that would burn through the trust between father and daughter like acid. And so she made a call. The man who picked up had a voice like gravel. He didn't ask why she called. He already knew. "I need something that will break him," she said. "How much do you want her?" "Destroyed?" he asked. "Completely." Within 3 days the package arrived. It came wrapped in brown paper, sealed with string. Zalika opened it carefully, like it was a sacred offering. Inside were forged documents, bank transactions that showed Nyasha moving large sums of money into a hidden account. There were fake emails too, conversations that made it look like she was building her own company, using her father's resources without his knowledge, and finally a single message typed in all caps from an anonymous source. "You trust her too much. She's planning to take it all." Zalika took the folder and walked into the main study where Makemba sat reading a business report. "Makemba," she said gently, holding the folder against her chest like it was breaking her heart. "I don't want to believe any of this, but I think you need to see it." He glanced up, puzzled, then took the folder. As his eyes moved over the documents, his face remained still, but his hands, they trembled. "She's planning something," Zalika whispered. "But I pray, I'm wrong." Makemba didn't speak. He closed the folder slowly, placed it on the desk and leaned back in his chair. Zalika watched his face. No rage, no shouts, just silence. But inside she knew everything had changed. Nyasha sensed it first in the way her father began pausing after her sentences. He no longer nodded with pride when she shared ideas. His compliments came slower, his smiles tighter. One evening, while reviewing company files with him, she noticed him watching her, not with affection but suspicion. "Father," she asked gently, "is something wrong?" Makemba looked away. "Have you been careful with your business dealings?" he asked. She frowned. "Of course, why would you ask that?" He gave no answer, only a nod. But the gap between them widened like a crack in glass. Nyasha left the room with a weight in her chest she couldn't name. Zalika, standing in the shadows beyond the corridor, allowed herself the smallest smile. The walls were closing in, and she had built every brick. Early the next morning, the sky over Zuberi was still dark when the raid began. Government agents stormed the Oba Holdings headquarters, Nyasha's private office. They moved like lightning, seizing computers, sweeping files into boxes, shouting orders to stunned assistants. Every drawer was turned upside down, every record scanned. By noon, the media had the story. Golden daughter, accused of embezzlement, heir to empire, betrays her father's trust. Screens in taxis, offices, and salons across the city played footage of Nyasha being questioned by uniformed men. Her name became a storm. Her face, once adored, now became the face of scandal. Makemba sat in his office watching the news cycle on a loop. The anchor's voice sliced through the silence. Will Chief Makemba support his daughter during this investigation? A reporter cornered him outside the estate gates. Cameras swarmed. He looked at them, expression unreadable. "There will be an investigation," he said slowly, each word like a stone. "Until then, I must distance myself from my daughter." The words shattered Nyasha more than the accusations ever could. She sat in her apartment, staring at the screen. Her father, her protector, her pride, had turned away from her for the first time in her life. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. In a darkened corner of the estate, Zalika lit a candle. Watching the flame flicker like a heartbeat, she closed her eyes and exhaled in satisfaction. The first phase of her plan was complete. The mansion had grown quieter in the days that followed, not in peace, but in tension. Nyasha's name filled the mouths of merchants, ministers, and maids alike. Her face lingered on front pages. Her photos were scrutinized, her past dissected. But Zalika wasn't finished. The candle on the wooden table burned low, its flame dancing wildly, as if it knew a storm was brewing. She sat before it, unmoving, her face half lit by the flickering light. The whispers she once carefully planted had grown teeth. Now they were not whispers. They were headlines, rumors, accusations. Nyasha was everywhere, her name on the front page of Zuberi's major newspapers, her face on television screens across the country. They called her the true daughter of the empire. Investors were pulling their confidence from others and placing it squarely in Nyasha's hands. Makemba, her father, had officially declared her the heir, the one who would inherit the sprawling fortune and power of the Mbali. Legacy, Zalika's heart, once made soft by dreams of her own son ruling one day, now turned into a hard stone. If Nyasha lived, her son would have nothing. It had started as strategy. Now it was survival. She reached for her phone. Her fingers didn't shake. She dialed a number only used once before, a line kept for emergencies. The voice that answered was male, deep, and devoid of emotion. "Yes, it must look clean," Zalika whispered. There was a pause. "How clean?" "She must vanish," Zalika said, standing up, her reflection in the mirror looking nothing like a mother, but everything like a weapon, forever. Another silence, then a shift in the voice. "The price just changed." Zalika didn't hesitate. "Send me the amount, and send me the plan." She ended the call and exhaled, a twisted satisfaction spreading through her like oil in water. By this time tomorrow, Nyasha would be nothing but a fading memory. The Grand Unity Gala was a sea of silk and shining teeth. Women in shimmering head wraps glided across the marble floor. Men in embroidered agbadas and walking sticks laughed over wine. Drums rolled faintly in the background as dancers twirled outside the entrance hall. Chief Makemba stood near the center, greeting dignitaries. And not far from him, Nyasha floated like a flame, her gown a deep crimson, her smile effortless, her poise unshaken. She greeted senators, CEOs, foreign ambassadors. She didn't know it would be her last night among them. Zalika moved through, the room like perfume, graceful, pleasant, unassuming. No one saw the storm behind her smile, her eyes locked briefly with a waiter across the room. He nodded. On his tray, a single flute of wine shimmered, its contents laced with a substance that would dull the senses, blur the mind, soften the body. Not poison, just enough to cloud Nyasha's ability to fight. The waiter approached. The group where Nyasha stood laughing. "To the future," he said, offering her the glass with a charming smile. Nyasha raised her eyebrows. "How thoughtful," she said, lifting the glass. "To legacy, then." She sipped. Then again. The wine tasted slightly off, but she didn't question it. The music covered the moment, and soon the room swirled around her in soft colors. Her smile remained, but her legs grew heavy. Her heartbeat slowed. Then came the shadows. Two men in dark suits approached, badges flashing in the dim light. "Miss Nyasha," one said, voice firm. "You're under investigation. You need to come with us now." Nyasha blinked, confused. "What, investigation?" Her knees trembled. She turned to find her father, but he was deep in conversation, his back to her. The lights stretched like tunnels, and the music now sounded distant, underwater. "Now, Miss Nyasha," the man repeated. I don't understand." They each grabbed an arm. Zalika, watching from across the room, took a slow sip from her own glass. The corner of her mouth lifted. The crowd didn't notice. The car rolled out from the mansion gates, weaving through the quiet streets of Zuberi. The towers of the city faded in the distance, replaced by broken fences, empty land, and darkness. Nyasha sat slumped in the back seat, her mind cloudy. She tried to lift her head. "Where are we going?" she mumbled, her throat dry. The men said nothing. Panic crawled up her chest. "This isn't the police station," she whispered, trying to reach the door. Her hands barely moved. She turned her head, her vision unfocused. Behind their car was another, a black SUV in the front passenger seat. She saw her Zalika. Nyasha's heart dropped. Her stepmother's eyes met hers through the window. There was no warmth in them, no confusion. Only certainty. This wasn't an arrest, it was a burial. The car came to a stop in a dry clearing, far from any road, under the cold gaze of the moon. The door swung open, hands grabbed her roughly. "No, please," Nyasha tried to scream, but her voice barely came out. The ground beneath her feet crunched with gravel and dry weeds. She struggled, but her limbs refused to obey. "Inside," one man snapped. A large hole yawned before her, freshly dug, its soil still loose. "No!" she cried, her body dragged forward. "I'm your husband's daughter. How will you explain this?" Figure stepped into the light. Zalika. She wore white, calm, clean, unbothered. She crouched beside the hole, looking at Nyasha with a strange softness. "You should have never been born," she said, as if stating a fact. Nyasha sobbed. "What are you doing?" "Please!" Zalika tilted her head. "What does it look like?" Tears streamed down Nyasha's face. "Please, I've done nothing to you." Zalika didn't blink. "By morning, this will be history." A man stepped forward with a shovel. The first scoop of dirt landed against Nyasha's legs, cold, heavy, real. "No, please don't do this," she screamed, trying to twist, her wrists bound tight with thick rope. Another scoop. Dirt hit her side. Zalika watched with quiet satisfaction. The third scoop hit her chest. Nyasha coughed, spitting soil, panic overtaking her. She tried to dig herself free, but the more she moved, the faster she sank into the soft earth. More dirt, more silence. Her breathing became shallow. Her vision shook. "No, please, please," she gasped. Zalika leaned over the edge one last time. Goodbye, Nyasha. The final shovel fell. Darkness. Stillness. A muffled scream beneath the earth. Zalika stood still as the final handful of soil was pressed flat above the grave. It was quiet now. The night no longer carried cries, only the distant rustle of dry grass. Under wind, the two men who had buried Nyasha worked quickly and without emotion, their boots stomping down the earth until it looked like part of the landscape. Zalika took a breath, deep and long, as if she were drinking peace itself. It was over. The girl who had once ruled every room was now part of the soil. Her greatest obstacle had been removed. Without a glance back, Zalika turned, dusting her hands as if wiping away years of resentment. The weight on her shoulders dissolved with every step toward her car. As she opened the door and slid into the leather seat, a smile finally bloomed on her lips. For the first time in years, she felt free. She returned home before dawn. She poured herself a full glass of palm wine and leaned back in her velvet chair, the red glow of a candle painting shadows across the walls. Her fingers traced the rim of the glass slowly, savoring the moment. No one would ever question her again. No more side-eyes. No more whispers about who the true heir was. Nyasha, the golden girl, was no more. Zalika picked up her phone and scrolled lazily through the news apps. No alerts, no investigations, no sign of suspicion. The world had moved on, and so she whispered to herself, "Would Kemba." She was never meant to stay, Zalika muttered, lifting her glass in a silent toast. And now, she's gone. But across the city, in a tiny apartment above a spice shop, someone else wasn't ready to move on. Ebele had been Nyasha's closest friend since childhood, the kind of friend who knew when something felt off without needing to be told. That evening she sat on her couch frowning at her phone. The message she'd sent Nyasha hours ago remained unread. Her call went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like her. Nyasha never ignored messages, especially not from Ebele, a sinking feeling twisted in Ebele's stomach. She remembered something, a conversation days ago. Nyasha had laughed about it then, brushing it off. She had mentioned a strange encounter. Two men who had claimed to be police officers wanting to ask her some questions. Nyasha hadn't taken it seriously. But now, the silence was screaming. Ebele opened a private app on her phone, a tracking tool she had secretly installed on Nyasha's device a year ago. Just in case something ever happened. She tapped in her password. Her breath caught. The last recorded location wasn't anywhere near a police station. It was on the outskirts of the city, a half-abandoned construction site. "No," Ebele whispered, heart racing. "Something's wrong." She grabbed her coat and phone and bolted down the stairs. At the local police station, the mood was slow. Tired officers slouched at desks, drinking cold tea and yawning into papers. Then Ebele burst in. "I need to report a kidnapping," she shouted, slamming her phone on the counter. A few heads turned, unimpressed. "She probably just went out," one officer said, not even lifting his eyes. "No," Ebele snapped. "She doesn't disappear, not like this." Another officer, older and round-bellied, sighed. "Do you have proof?" "Yes," she said, opening the tracking app. "Her last location is here," she pointed. "And it's not near any station or known address. It's a construction site. And she didn't go there willingly." That got their attention. The room shifted. Officers exchanged glances. One picked up a radio, his voice steady, but urgent. "Send a team, now." By the time the sun peeked over, the Hills workers at the construction site were just arriving. They carried buckets and bricks, preparing to pour a concrete foundation. But then came the sirens. Police trucks rolled up, lights flashing. Officers jumped out, ordering everyone to back away from the southern edge of the property. Confused, the workers obeyed. "Start digging here," one officer shouted. The foreman hesitated. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Start digging." A shovel hit the dirt, then another, and another. The soil was loose. Something was wrong. For a moment, There was only silence. Then, movement. Faint sound, muffled, weak, a gasp, the officers froze. She's alive. Dig! The shovels flew faster now, tossing soil in every direction. Hands tore through the dirt, eyes wide with urgency, breath short with fear. And then, a pale hand emerged. Another scoop, a cheek smeared in mud. More digging. Then, a breathless sob. They pulled her out gently, quickly. Her body was cold, her skin ghostly, but her chest was rising. Nyasha, the girl who had been buried, was alive. The city buzzed with disbelief. How did she survive? What kind of monster would do this? But the answer came faster than anyone expected. Zalika, dressed in gold lace, stood on stage at a lavish charity event that evening. The room shimmered with admiration as guests clapped, shook her hand, and praised her for her generosity. She smiled, taking in the glory like sunlight. She didn't see it coming. The sirens cut through the music like a knife. Police officers entered the hall in silence. Everyone turned. A voice, clear and firm, shattered the calm. Zalika Makemba, you are under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit a crime. The wineglass slipped from Zalika's hand, crashing to the floor. Her smile vanished. What? There must be some mistake. The officer didn't blink. Tell that to the judge. The cuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Gasps filled the air. The guests who had just praised her now backed away in horror. She tried to kill Nyasha, someone whispered. The same girl she raised like her own. The murmurs grew louder, rising like waves. Zalika was dragged through the hall, her head spinning. Cameras flashed. Her perfect image crumbled in real time. And just like that, the queen of manipulation had fallen. Back at the estate, Chief Makemba sat alone in his study. He had watched the news clip on loop Zalika's arrest. Her face twisted in disbelief. Her name repeated in every headline like a curse. He sat in silence. Had trusted her. He had believed her, and because of that trust. His daughter had almost died. His hands trembled as he reached for his glass, but he didn't drink. He couldn't taste anything through the guilt that wrapped around his throat like a rope. How had he been so blind? A quiet knock echoed through. The hallway of the Mbali estate. He turned from the window slowly, his body stiff from hours of sitting, his thoughts weighed down by shame heavier than stone. The door creaked open. She stood there, Nyasha alive. For a moment Makemba forgot how to breathe. His heart stalled, his throat tightened. Nyasha, he whispered, his voice cracking like dry bark. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence said it all. There was no fury in her eyes, no fire of vengeance, just stillness, quiet strength, the kind that is born in suffering and sharpened by survival. Makemba stepped forward, his hands trembling. I almost lost you, he whispered. Nyasha nodded slowly. Yes, she said gently. You did. His knees gave way. He sank before her, the mighty chief now reduced to a father begging forgiveness. I was a fool, he choked. I let her twist my mind. I doubted you, Nyasha. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm, steady. She didn't pull away. She could have let his regret break her, but instead she rose above it. I will not be a victim, she said, her voice soft but clear. I will not live in fear. I will not let her define me. Makemba looked up, the weight of her words washing over him like rain in dry season. A slow understanding formed in his eyes. His daughter was not broken. She was reborn. Makemba stood. He didn't try to speak. He simply nodded, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, father and daughter stood together. Elsewhere, in a cold, grey cell with no windows, Zalika sat hunched over on the concrete bench, her once proud back now bent. The walls were bare, the silence was loud, and for the first time in years she had no one to impress, no room to dominate, no mask to wear. The woman who once controlled the lives of everyone in her household now ruled nothing. Her mind replayed that night. The grave, the dirt, Nyasha's cries. Zalika thought she had buried her deepest threat, but fate, cunning, invisible fate, had dug her own grave instead. Nyasha's final words echoed in her skull like a curse. "I am your husband's daughter." How will you explain this? There was no explaining it now. The world had judged and justice had spoken. In court, the room was silent. The chandeliers hung above the judge like watching spirits. Spectators filled every seat, their eyes locked. On Zalika as she stood in her designer dress, now dull, wrinkled, and useless. Her jewelry sparkled, but it no longer dazzled. Her lips were dry. Her hands trembled. Gone was the graceful woman of influence. In her place stood a criminal, a murderer who had buried a daughter like waste. Even now, she searched for someone, anyone, to look at her with mercy. She turned her head toward Makemba, but he didn't meet her eyes. He sat tall and silent beside Nyasha, who looked ahead calmly, her face a shield of dignity. Then the judge's voice rang through the courtroom, heavy and final. "Zalika Makemba, for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted homicide, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole." The words struck like hammers. "Life," Zalika gasped. Her chest caved in. She looked again at Makemba, desperate now. Would he plead for her? Remember their years together. He did not move. He did not speak. He had already buried her in his heart. 2 guards stepped forward. The click of cuffs echoed like thunder. Zalika's last walk out of the courtroom was slow, heavy. The only sound that followed her was the rattling of the chains around her wrists, the only legacy she now carried. Later that week, Makemba sat alone in his study. The empire he had built was intact, but it no longer felt familiar. He stared at a photo on his desk, an old picture of Nyasha as a child, holding her late mother's hand, smiling with wild joy. He had almost lost it all. He had almost handed everything over to the wrong person. The guilt was an ocean, and he was drowning in it. Nyasha entered quietly. She didn't announce herself. She didn't scold him, she simply waited. Makemba looked up, eyes hollow. "You were always the rightful heir," he said, his voice full of gravel and grief. Nyasha didn't gloat. She didn't lean on pride. She had already won. "You trusted the wrong person," she said gently. "But now you must trust the right one." He nodded, not because he had no choice, but because he finally saw her for who she truly was. He stood, walked around the desk, and in front of the watching eyes of the estate's advisors, the business partners, and the elders of the Mbali clan. Chief Makemba placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder and bowed slightly. It was official. Nyasha now stood at the helm of the Mbali legacy. She walked through the grand halls of her family empire, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Her name, once whispered with envy or doubt, now rolled off tongues with reverence. The girl who had been nearly erased had returned to become a legend. The media now called her the Phoenix of Zubiri. Investors who had once questioned her now lined up to shake her hand. At her first press conference, the cameras flashed like lightning. Journalists jostled to capture her words. Her assistants handed out statements. The crowd hushed as she stepped forward. She wore a deep emerald wrapper, her mother's necklace around her throat, her gaze firm and unafraid. She gripped the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. "I was buried once," she said, voice steady. "But I refused to stay." Underground. The room fell into stunned silence. Then came the applause, not just for her survival, but for her triumph, for her courage, for her rebirth. From that day on, people across the continent told her story in hushed awe, not just of what had been done to her, but what she had done in return. She had not sought revenge. She had chosen honor. She had not allowed pain to turn her bitter. She had become stronger than ever. Nyasha, the girl who was once thrown into the earth, had returned to plant her own roots, and this time they would grow into something mighty, a tree that no one could ever uproot again. No matter how deep someone tries to bury the truth, it will always rise. Greed, jealousy, and manipulation may win for a moment, but truth, courage, and integrity will always win in the end. Be careful whom you trust, and never let evil go unchallenged. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. for more powerful African tales that expose betrayal, celebrate resilience, and remind us that the spirit cannot be buried. Click the bell so you never miss a moment.